ranger or battlefield guide to really say that they understand the fighting in the Wheatfield, okay? And I would say very few of us actually do. This is a confused fight. I think the Whirlpool of Battle is a great name. This, in my opinion, is probably the bloodiest spot of the Civil War. Not Miller's Cornfield, not Pickett's Charge, not the field at Franklin, which, by the way, the fighting in and around the Wheatfield produced 2/3 as many casualties as the entire Battle of Franklin. Before things get out of hand, it's important to note that. And it's a horrible fight. And in summary, you know, you have, because of Sickles, you know, didn't have enough men to man his entire line, you know, you've got some main troops along the wall over there. You've got a few 6 cannons in support, but they're Napoleons. They can't even fire over the woods, okay? And the Southerners come from here, they come from there, they come from there, and of course the Union rushes in reinforcements, but the Southerners start coming up the road over there, and Yankees start appearing this way, as Southerners are working their way from over there into this area, and it keeps changing hands. Ultimately, you're going to have more Union regulars come in from that direction, fighting with the Confederates. The Confederates push on all the way through the Wheatfield, get over Houck's Ridge, into the Valley of Death, and almost attack Little Round Top from the west, when you have some members of the Pennsylvania Reserve, but really of the 1st Brigade of the 6th Corps to arrive on the field, Nevin's Brigade, which includes the 93rd and the 98th Pennsylvania, and I know you all are here today. And then it settles into a no man's land. And by every account, this is one of the most horrible places you could ever be on the night of the 2nd. The cries of the wounded, the sheer number of killed and wounded in this area. I've heard people talk about the cries of the dead, which is pretty interesting. It was said you could walk from one side to the other stepping on bodies. I've done it. I've tried to figure out how many people would have died in the Wheatfield proper, and if they happened to die lined up straight like this with a gap between them so you go from one to the other, and it might just be possible if they happen to do it that way. So it sounds an exaggeration, but if you look at this 1888 drawing, some people did not find it an exaggeration. This is what people remember seeing in the Wheatfield. And you know what? We have some Civil War photos that kind of show this. And remember, the Civil War photos that we have of the dead show the dead, not the 4 times as many wounded that were produced on average in Civil War battles of wounded to dead. So if you see 10 dead soldiers in a photo, and there's not that many photos that show that, imagine 40 wounded with those 10 dead. Okay? Imagine some other quote-unquote missing, many of whom are going to be dead and wounded anyway. Okay? So it's a very substantial thing. This battlefield, here showing a very rare photo of Dead in the Rose Woods, in the woods themselves, not in the open field, but rather laid out for burial by friends. This is found in William A. Frazanito's book, Early Photography at Gettysburg. This is right near the other Rose Farm series, the most extensive series of dead soldiers photographed anywhere on any Civil War battlefield is right over there. You can see the Rose House from here. And of the 97 photos taken of dead soldiers on battlefields during the Civil War, 37 were taken at Gettysburg. And more were taken on the Rose Farm, of more bodies than anywhere else. Okay? So this is what we know so far. This battlefield, we tend to gravitate toward a place like the Rose Farm or Devil's Den where dead soldiers were photographed. But the fact is the whole battlefield looked this way. We tend to be able to visualize it better by using the photos of the dead. So we gravitate toward those places. Don't get me wrong. This is one of my ways to connect with the battlefield. And when you do 3D of dead soldiers out on battlefields, it provides an experience you can't really get anywhere else and basically in no other way. So again, take these things out. You can take your 3D book out, or you can take your Frazanito books out. You can do this at other battlefields and whatnot and really come to understand it. And I thought today would be a great tour. I know we're in a place a lot of people haven't considered, but to talk briefly about the Harvest of Death. I really don't want to talk about this much. 5 photos, in other words, 5 or 6% of all the photos known of Civil War dead is of this group of bodies. And nobody knows where they are. So we thought today would be an excellent time to finally reveal that we still don't know where these photos are taken, okay? Now, there have been 30 to 50 people, depending on what you count as viable, that know exactly where this is. And they argue with us. And their chief argument seems to be, well, if my spot isn't right, where is it then? Our not knowing where it is has nothing to do with their spot being right or wrong. The people who are proponents of this theory it's not like we don't want their theories to be right. I can't wait for someone to find this thing, whether it's one of us or somebody else, or a 10-year-old kid that just gets lucky. I don't care. But what I will not do is sanction a spot that we know is impossible. And every one of the theories, every one that somebody has advanced, no matter what you're talking about, whether you're talking about near Copes Hill, on the first day, along the 3rd Corps line, anywhere, along Seminary Ridge, at Antietam, every one of those is demonstrably impossible. But that does not stop the proponents of these theories from saying, oh sure, it's impossible, but let me tell you why it's right. Okay? It is a crazy world when it comes to these photos. It is the greatest Civil War photo mystery, I believe. And I hope that we can stand here one day. I have no doubt I've probably walked over the spot. Okay, but where is it? They're Union dead. They're probably some of the earliest photos taken on the battlefield. That's pretty cool. They're missing their shoes, so maybe we think it's a place where the Confederates had it and removed them of their sorely needed footwear at the time. But we just don't know. We have it in 2D, we have it in 3D. We have every advantage except rocks. There are no rocks in these photos. Although people invent them and put them in there. Tim?
What is a great spot to talk about the dead and the Civil War and our knowledge of the battle? I think one of the things we suffer from, being interpreters and battlefield guides and trying to, we strive to make the battle easy to understand to the multitudes of visitors that come here. And then we're faced with something like the Wheatfield, where it is very confusing. And I think, when I'm on the tour, battlefield tours, and we're talking to people about the battle and people, talk about this or that, I guess I tend to rail against easy to understand facts. Like, a lot of people in the battlefield, and that's probably why we generally get upset when people talk too much about the 20th Maine, because they just want to say, oh, whatever, that's all right. That wasn't important anyway, because this was what was really important. This 300 men fighting against these 300 or 400 men. Forget about the fact that here there's, 30,000 men fighting against 20,000 or something like that. There's, 50,000 men. It is confusing. And, isn't it might be counterproductive for me to want the people on my tour to think that the Wheatfield is confusing, that I don't know what happened. When I'm trying to explain to them this is what happened. But it is very confusing. And the Wheatfield changed hands multiple times. As northern and southern units were fed into this meat grinder that was called the Whirlpool Battle. If you try to do a statistical analysis of the units here, I always like to say that the Rose Farm, and we can look over and see the Rose Farmhouse, the guy owns like 230 acres of land. Something like 9,000 Americans crossed over his land. And in something like 2.5 hours of fighting, there were 9,000 casualties suffered by the units that crossed over portions of his property. I'm sure anyone could analyze it and take this unit out or put this unit in and, add Devil's Den into it or not add it into it, and you could get a slightly different statistic. But I like to argue that the